Fuel systems seem to come up a lot when you're doing an LS swap on these square bodies. And there's plenty of ways to skin a cat, and there's lots of people who make fuel tanks, and there's probably ways to cut a few corners. I'll give you this warning. When you're doing this LS swap and people tell you how cheap it is, you're looking at $1,500 worth of stuff, and I'm sure there's something that I'm missing. I personally like to maintain the dual tank since this is a factory dual tank truck. So I ordered 2 new Dorman tanks, but they're for the 87 model square body due to it being fuel injection, and it has the baffles in the tank. I'll show you those here. It is the same part number for both sides, so when you see that part number on screen, that's either one. The reason that works, I brought these out to show you, the hoses are what makes the difference because they reach over for the supply and the return line on either side. They come this weird putty color, like all these newer cars are being painted, so maybe that's the driver, but not sure I'm gonna love it with the paint scheme on our truck. We'll see if they show and then we'll deal with it, because I did get rid of the plastic skids off the bottom, because yuck. Also, these come with the retaining rings and an O-ring. So if you're buying parts, keep in mind, you're gonna get a set of those. This kit is from Tanks Inc., although it was cheaper for me to buy it through Summit than it was from the manufacturer. It was 415 bucks, and it comes with the line that you'll need, all these fittings, combiner, so the 2 tanks go into one, 2 check valves so the fuel doesn't go backwards into the tank you're not using, which, there's that Y fitting. There's one of the check valves. It comes with these regulator filters, which are out of LS powered Corvettes. And it comes with the fittings that you need to snap in place to convert it to an AN, which I highly recommend because AN is super easy to assemble and they tend to not leak. These push lot fittings are really the deal that comes in this kit. I've done AN lines before. You guys have seen it on previous videos. And it's a huge nightmare and just a ton of work. Whereas you can just slide that hose right over these barbs. It doesn't even require any kind of a hose clamp. Actually, they say not to because it'll just cause this to cut into the hose. I've already tested it whenever I did that engine stand start. And I just pressed that into the hose as far as you can see it and didn't leak a bit. And I literally snugged this by hand into that filter regulator. For the fuel level sender and the pumps that are in tank, I did order those from Hot Rod Fuel Hose. A lot of it was just availability from different vendors and pricing. So this kit ran me 450 bucks. When I ordered these, all they had were passenger size fuel sending units. And these are actually the Walbro 255 liter per hour pumps, which naturally aspirated LS power, I've read anywhere up to 700 horsepower that they're good for, whereas forced induction, maybe down to 5 or 550. Now, a lot of you wiring wizards can build your own harness if you use the dual tank switch and make all your gauge work properly, etc. There's a guy on Facebook that I was recommended to in some of the forums that he has a company that builds these harnesses. So I reached out to him. It's 329 bucks shipped to my house. I can't give any kind of rating for communication because I would call it poor at best. And I would have really liked to have seen this kit on a website somewhere to know exactly what it came with. Good example is I do not need this factory replacement valve that takes the pressure sides and sends back anything over whatever 58 or 60 PSI. It's actually only rated for, I think, 60 PSI. You'll potentially burst this thing. Since I'm using that kit, this is kind of redundant. Of course, this harness that I paid for is made to run that valve as well. So again, I've got some redundancy here. I wish I would have known that. I'm not really blaming him. I'm just blaming my lack of information gathering. So those are the goods. I'm gonna get it installed in the truck now that I've got the suspension done, and then I'll probably put the front suspension in. It's good to just have all that stuff done and I can test it before we move on to the next step. Here's the assembled kits from the Hot Rod Fuel Hose. Again, these are the Walbro 255s with a little insulator on them, the rubber boot and the bracket and socks. It does come with the wiring connection that goes from the pump to the sending unit, so you don't have to really buy anything or worry about it. As a matter of fact, a lot of the stuff is duplicated from the pump and the sender, so you'll end up with these extra O-rings Again, they've got collars, but your tanks come with O-rings and collars, so you're gonna end up with 3 total per side. Anyway, a little extra hose. This is a different little stopper thing, but it doesn't fit very well on those pumps, so not sure what's up with that. Anyway, these are put together. Also want to point out for the driver's side, what I did was I cut these tabs off with 10 snips, which is what locates them in the tank and points this. Technically it'd point it on the towards the outside of the truck. I really want it to point to the inside. Also kind of helps with that float, because if you don't have it clocked correctly, that float can make contact with the sides of the baffle in there, and nobody wants that. So just cut the tabs off. I'll set it down square on the O-ring and lock it down. I can't see a single thing that could go wrong. After you choose an O-ring from the half dozen that you've got available to you, if you buy all these kits, you just want to kind of start it on the unit before you get it set in there. Makes life a lot easier. Then choose one of the multiple collars that you have. If you think you've got it, you just want to make sure you've hammered each one of the tabs against the stops and that you don't see excessive O-ring hanging out on any one side, so you've got a good seal. Here's the fuel line set up, and this is the part of these projects that really frustrate me. So imagine, if you will, when you see a gap between these two like barbed fittings, that's where the hose is. So this connects to our engine with a 3/8 quick connect fitting on the fuel rail. And then it'll go to this splitter combiner, which basically will send the fuel to the engine from either side, either tank. These are the one-way check valves that'll only let fuel go out. And then this is the fuel regulator slash filter. This is, like I said, the Corvette style. So there's one of these for each side. Now, you've got these quick connects that go on here. This is a 5/16 return and the 3/8 supply line, which takes these guys and these guys. Now, you'd connect a barb to the end of these and run hose to these barbs, but then what do you hook this to? Well, it seems to me they shorted us another pair, actually 2 pair of these quick connect fittings. Because if you look at your fuel tank, like I said, this is the factory sender. This is a 5/16 return, and this is a 3/8 supply. So you can just cut the barb end off and use these quick connects onto there like you would the late model fuel injection stuff. Of course, we would need a pair of these for each tank. While waiting for the proper fittings to show up, I went ahead and mounted this valve because, like I said, I think that the fuel level gauges are going to flow through this. So it doesn't weigh anything. It's not going to be a big deal to install it. I also made this bracket so I could install this filter regulator assembly that's going to kind of be our crossover. And then it'll connect with the driver's side fuel lines, and then be able to run up this side to hook to our engine. These are the fittings I ordered. They were available next day on Amazon Prime from Evil Energy, which I think our fuel filter on their last build was that same brand. So they sold them in pairs for a 5/16 line and a 3/8 hard line. But basically what these are, compression fittings with this ferrule, or this olive, I think you call it. I'm not sure, I'm no plumber. But you basically are going to cut the barb off of those sending unit tubes, slide this over it, and then it's going to convert it to our 6AN line. I don't love the fact that I spent all that money on this fuel line kit. Like I said, I bought it through Summit, but it's actually a tank's part number, and they have no way to actually hook it to your sending units. It comes with these 2 fittings that I'm not sure what they're supposed to be for. They're NPT. But there's only two, and you're running a dual fuel tank, clearly, because they sent us two of these, and this combiner, and enough fittings to go on everywhere else. So I have no idea what the thought process was there, or except for the fact that you need to come up with your own way to hook 2 3/8 fuel lines to both the supply and return line on your sending unit. If you're watching this video, you didn't already mount these sending units in the tank because you learned this lesson ahead of time. You definitely don't want to be cutting these with them still in the fuel tank so you can clean them out nice and good. Let's see, this is the 5/16 one. Drops on. That drops on. I'm going to hold this all the way down against the little ridge there and thread the male side in till it makes contact. It's still pretty loose, it'll come right off of there. So get my 3/4 inch wrenches. I have no idea what kind of torque spec this is going to take, but I guess just use your best judgment knowing that you're threading an aluminum fitting and that it can only take so much. Hope that goes well. Forgive the crudeness of this setup, but what I wanted to do was test both of these sending units and make sure they work with our gauge system, which I don't remember what the name of this is, like New Vintage USA or something. If it were free, I would remember the brand. So I'll hook this one up, and as I adjust it, I do see the gauge work. So that's good. I tested the other gauge as well. Now I'm going to try to run it through this harness that I bought and see if the switch will work and change which sending unit this gauge reads from. Now I've installed the entire harness and I've made sure and plug in that fuel selector valve that we didn't think we're going to need, but we'll need it to switch which sending unit this gauge reads from. It will require me to send power to one of the fuel pumps when I select it. Otherwise, it'll continue to read the same fuel sender. For example, we're selected the left-hand pump, which is the driver's side, which is here. It shows full. You can move it down and it'll move to empty. If I select this right-hand pump, I'm gonna set it to full just so you can see it's not gonna activate it. But if I send power to our fuel pump signal, then it'll tell that tank selector to move signal to the other pump and to the other sender. Just gonna do it just for a split second so it'll complete that circuit. Well, this is a good test to do to make sure all the wiring and everything works before you get these settled down in the tank and find out you have a problem. Also confirms both the pumps work based on the switch. Just wanted to point out I'd cleaned up all these mount brackets and I'm using this Flex Seal tape kind of as a liner inside the strap so it doesn't chafe the tank. The factory stuff is junk by now, and I mean, you could use a tire inner tube or something else, but this worked for me. I think it was about 15 bucks for this roll and it'll take care of all 4 of them. I've measured on these straps kind of center to center on the bolt holes to match the frame so they'll be really close. Main thing is don't tighten these up very much. Just get them started so you can still move it a little bit if you need to make adjustments while you're tightening it. So I did a little quick press on these hoses to these fittings and attached them to those fittings that are on the sending unit. These really press on super easy. It'll almost scare you like you're afraid they're gonna leak. Also, this is 1/4 inch fuel line. It's basically just for vapor. And I will, at some point, run like a charcoal canister, tie these two together, the 2 tanks together, and then run a hose down to the charcoal canister. Because if you've ever just left one of these open on this vent, and park your vehicle in a garage, you'll notice it the next day because it'll get to stinking. I've shared this trick before, but I like to put a little engine assembly lube on some of these older bolts, and it helps get them in and out much easier. Anti-seize is kind of the same thing, but for some reason this is more of an oil and tends to work better in this kind of application. So our ground, put it right back in that factory location. I'll show you just how easy this stuff is. It's kind of shocking really that it doesn't leak. That's it. You press this hose on those fittings like that, and that's your seal. You guys remember a few videos back whenever I showed, or when we built a lot of those PTFE lined AN stuff, and I mean with the cutting, the crimping, and the olive in there, it's a huge pain in the butt, whereas this, totally not. Here's the completed fuel system. That's the supply and return for the passenger side tank, and that's again those vent lines that want to run to a charcoal canister. Anyway, these two come to this first regulator filter, and there's the output, one-way check valve. It comes around and joins the supply and the return from the driver's side, and here's the driver's side filter regulator. One-way check valve, and then those combine together, and that's going to run up to our engine. Now once I see what the exhaust system looks like under here, I'll know if I need to order like some of that DEI heat wrap. And I can just unfasten these and slide that stuff over each one of those lines. It'll look really nice and keep that stuff from getting too hot. To make this a well-rounded video, I've put some gasoline in this tank, and I ran our line to our intake with the disconnect fitting. Of course, we'll cut this excess out once we get this engine installed. Then I've got our old snap-on fuel pressure gauge, so we'll know if we're keeping somewhere near 60 PSI. So I've got it. Got fuel in the left-hand tank. So I'm gonna flip this switch and see what happens. $60. Let's check for leaks. Seems to be happy. The reason why it's noisy is there's almost no gas in this tank to insulate the sound around the pump, plus the cap's open and all that good stuff, so it won't be that loud. Now what I'm gonna do is bleed this pressure off. I apologize, I didn't go get a bunch of gas, so I'm gonna disconnect this, pump the fuel into this tank, put it in the other right side fuel tank, and then try it again so we can test the rest of the fittings. Hopefully there's enough fuel in there for it to pick up. So we'll switch this to right-hand tank, turn on. It looks like stuck right there at 57. Let's see if there's a leak. Nothing I can see or smell. Probably snug those up a little bit. Yeah, it's inched on up to 58, which I think is what the claim is for that factory Corvette regulator. I'm gonna call this a win. I mean, barely a leak over there at one of those fittings, which is a pretty simple fix, not hard to reach. The pressure came up where we wanted it to. The switch worked, the harness. Everything was a win today, so that's always a good day. I appreciate you guys watching, and we'll see you next time we put the front suspension under this guy.